Okay, let's begin, everybody. Chag Sameach, Yom Yerushalayim Sameach. I think I don't know about you, but personally, I think it's hard to really tap into the spirit of today. Um, Also in Israel as well, unless you're actually in Yerushalayim, in the Rikud Galim, in the parade, being swept up by the crowd. It's hard to really tap into the miracle, to value the miracle that we have, which is that accessibility to Har HaMoriah. So as we have been learning about this amazing time period of Shivat Zion, of this return to Zion, which resembles so closely our modern day return to Israel. This time period, this great time period where they're rebuilding Yerushalayim, and Livua is phasing out, rabbinic Judaism is transitioning in, and the context of Nechemia it's a complex situation. It's not that they return to Yerushalayim as we all hope to return to Yerushalayim, where the Beit HaMikdash just falls down from the sky and we come floating in on clouds, right? That's not the situation. They're actually on the grounds, and at every turn, there are different obstacles that the nation needs to grapple with. So as they're going through this, and they have all of these external enemies that are threatening the building of the wall of Yerushalayim, which was one of Nechemia's great achievements that we spoke about 2 weeks ago, that he was able to complete the building of this wall only in 52 days, while there were threats from all different directions. In the middle of this storyline, as we're reading through the Prakim, and last week we even passed the Parak that we're going to focus in on today, there's Parak Hey. And Parak Hey, it really stands out. It's exceptional. It's an exception to the storyline that's actually unfolding. Rav Sherlow, a big Rav in Israel, he comes and he explains that the breakdown of society, the inner rotting, oftentimes happens from within, mainly during times of distress, of emergency, of war, because during those times it's almost impossible to deal with social justice and social issues. If all, the same way that on a biological level, our brains, that when we are faced with an external threat, all the other parts of our minds are kind of blocked out, and the main primitive part is working, is on alert. We're not meant to, in times of extreme distress or trauma, to start talking about our emotions and thinking about them intellectually, emotionally. No, we need to ground ourselves. That's the way to deal with trauma, because only our primitive brain is working at that point. Same in the time of war. We don't have that availability, that luxury, I would even say, to deal with issues of social justice. The men are soldiers, the women are left at home. Oftentimes, there are financial issues that arise, that the women might need to take out a loan, especially in the past, in the times when the man was the main breadwinner. And a very hard example to bring up, even, and to speak about, is that example of David HaMelech when the nation is out fighting. The story of Oriah. Oriah is a chayal. He's sent out to fight, and Bathsheba is in her home without her husband, and David HaMelech stays behind. And we know the rest is history. So let's take a look at this exceptional parak, which is really comes out in the middle of this whole story of Nechemia building the wall already after the second Beit HaMikdash has been built, and understand it within the context of the other prakim. Okay, so if we look in Parak Aleph, Pasuk K, in the first source, we see here, Vati tza'akat ha'am u'leshehem gdola el achehem ha'yehudim. Please note the words that I have put in bold, because these are words that repeat themselves, and therefore they give us insight as to the themes, the threads that are running through the story. Okay, so Vati tza'akat, this great outcry from the people, the regular people, and their wives, was so great. El Acheim Yehudim, against their brothers. So if we look in the Malbim, the second source, right? They had this great outcry against the noblemen, the wealthy men that are there. And the Malbim explains, because interestingly, as we're going to see, if you look in the further psukim in the first source I underlined, it says 3 times, V'yesh asher omrim, V'yesh asher omrim, and there are those who said, and there are those who said, right? As if there are different voices amongst the crowd of outcries. So he explains, the Mama wants to say that there are 2 sects here. One sect is crying out about the future, that they don't have with what to sustain themselves. Okay? If we look at Pasuk Bet, V'yesh asher omrim, all right, there are those that say, Balelu uvnotelu alachlu rabim, v'likcha dagan v'lochal v'lochla v'lechia. Those who say that our sons and our daughters, alachlu rabim. So I would explain this, that rabim is that from the word ribi, to give as interest, right? So if you look at the Malbim as well, on the third source here, yesh asher omrim, היינו שנהיה מוכרחים למשכן בנינו ובנותינו ולהלוות עליהם בריבית כדי שניקח דגן ולחיה. We need to give our sons and our daughters as collateral, to lend them out with interest, so that we can actually take grain and be sustained. Because these were the people that didn't even have fields, and they didn't have with what to sustain themselves. We keep going on in the psukim, pasuk gimel, ויש אשר אומרים, שדותינו חרמנו ובתינו אנחנו אורבים ונקחה דגן ברעב. These are the people that they do have their fields and their vineyards. They need to pawn off their fields and their vineyards and their homes so that they can attain grain and field off their hunger. And the fourth one, the fourth pasuk, the third, ויש אשר אומרים, לבינו חסף למידת המלך, שדותינו וכרמנו. Those say that we had to lend money because there was a tax that they had to give to the Persian king at the time. We had to borrow money in order to pay off our taxes, our royal taxes. And so we borrowed money against our fields and our vineyards in order to pay the king's tax. And Malbim explains that here we see this is the Kachlia, this is the second sect, that they were crying out about the past, right? There are people, והיו אומרים, אנחנו ליווינו חסף עוד בשנה עברה, שגם שלא היה שנת רעב, right? We already borrowed money last year, even when it wasn't a year of famine, because we had to give that royal tax. And so we already then they needed to pawn off their fields and their vineyards. And pasuk K, the last pasuk of this section, we are just as good as our brothers that are wealthier than us. Our children are the same as their children. But here we have to subject our sons and our daughters to become slaves. And there are those that also are daughters that are also subjected to becoming maidservants, which, as we know as well, historically and contextually, that a woman maidservant is even more of a problem. We are powerless, while our fields and vineyards belong to others. They don't even have the power in their hands. And this is El Yadenu, El also comes from the word power, that we don't have, as Mitzudat David Zion explains here, Inyan Koch v'Ometz, we don't have the strength or the courage in order to be able to redeem them. Okay, so Rav Shlomo explains in this context that a family, he basically says there are different outcries, but it's all the same story, right? It's one storyline. A family gets into trouble. Let's say they have a field, and so they have a field and they took out a loan. They took out a loan in order to pay whatever it was that they needed to pay for, but now they don't know how to repay it. So their means to produce don't increase because they already took out a loan, and part of their field is given as this, like, in order to pay off this loan. And so their means to produce are just even smaller. And when they can't return that loan, and they're also afraid to lose that piece of land which does remain, they give their children to work by the wealthy nobleman, and the salary that they will get from that will be the way to actually repay this loan. But then, when that happens, when their children are given, there's no one left to work in their own fields. And the end game of this situation of um, of coming into the situation of trouble is that the family is enslaved to the nobleman. And nothing here, according to what Rav Shurlo wants to claim, and there are Mepharshim that do say otherwise, that nothing here in our particular story isn't according to the deen, to the dry law, right? The result here of what's going on, people are going according to the laws, right? They're giving loans, they're expecting the loans to be paid back. People are giving their fields or giving their daughters because they can't pay back their loans. But the result here is that they're the creation of social gaps, of these rifts between them. And so our parak, what's special about our parak is that it's focusing on the internal problem within the context of all of the other external problems that we have been dealing with until now and that we will continue to deal with in the rest of the prakim. We're not speaking about this talich, this process of corruption or problematic behavior. We're speaking about this perfectly legal situation, and the question is, what can be done? How do we get out of that situation? And we know that in every society, in every country, economically, we deal with these questions in every way. There's societies that deal with it through communism, socialism, through dictator, however it is, however the country responds to this issue of poor versus wealthy and charity versus paying back loans. And on one hand, you can understand the noblemen here, right? They're taking what belongs to them. Right. And here all of a sudden, the poor people are crying out and saying, give us charity, give us money. But charity, right? It's like that expression. You can give a man a fish, but he'll have a meal for one day. If you give him a rod, he'll have a meal for the rest of his life. Charity is like a band-aid. It doesn't take care of the root of the problem. Now it's interesting when we look, if you look in the psukim here, Vatit sa'akat ha'am u'lishatem gdola elachem ha'Yehudim. When it says elachem, it means referring to regarding their brothers. Their cry here is not directed at Nechemia, right? It's an outcry that's going on, and we would understand that if Nechemia, who is in the middle of, I think it would be reasonable to say he's in the middle of this huge operation of building this wall. There are the external enemies that are threatening to come and attack. This is, I mean, you can almost imagine it, the way that the Jews fought in the War of Independence. That they were literally children fighting, people throwing rocks from their windows. They didn't have these, sophisticated weapons. Here too, they're building this wall. They're not yet a fortified city. They don't yet have Tzahal, this strong force. They're trying to hold up a wall. And all of a sudden, there's this outcry. I would say it would be reasonable. Also, as Yehuda Troppers says in his shir, it'd be reasonable to turn away, to look the other way, right? To not necessarily pay attention right now, or to emphasize and to say, you know what? I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. I hear your pain. You know what? But there's nothing I can do. I'm in the middle of building this wall, and protection is the main thing, right? That's the most important right now, is that will be safe from that. We build this wall to protect us, right? That's the most important problem. But what does Nechemia do? How does he go about? How does he react to this situation? If we look at the psukim in Parakei Pasuk Vav, Vayichar li me'od כאשר שמעתי את זעקתם ואת הדברים האלה. It angered me very much when I heard their outcry and I heard these complaints. he was angry, and the Malbim explains he's angry about two things. That's what I love about the Malbim, is that no word is superfluous. Everything is layered. And so here he explains that he's angry about two different things. And how do we see that? Through the words. When it says, "Vayichar li מאוד kasher shamati et zakatav," that's referring to one thing that he's angry about. And the second thing that he's angry about is ve'et hadvarim ha'ela. He's saying that it's not that Veta Dvarim Ha'ela is coming to emphasize the first thing, but there are two layers of what's triggering his anger. And what are they? In Malbim it says here, "Chara lo al tza'akat ali'im me'akat harishona, shetza'aku amliyat tzedakah." He's talking about the first sect. Remember how we spoke about before that Malbim divides the two different outcries into two different groups. And he's angry about their outcry from the first. Oh, Ari?
What happened?
Since I've been signed out? No? I don't know. Are there people here? Do people still hear me? Yes? Okay, sorry. For some reason it said that I can end the meeting. Okay, don't know what just happened. Oh no, in the middle of this very intense part. Okay, I don't know why I keep saying. Okay. Anyways, okay, so he's angry because the first sect is speaking about what they're crying is that the noblemen are withholding charity, that they're not helping them. Here there are people that are literally fighting for food, and the noblemen are just, collecting their loans and not helping out the poor people. And the second thing that he's angry about, ve'et hadvarim ha'ela, is shehi tza'akat kat hashniya, shehi tza'akat eshek ve'on. The second one is the cry of the second sect, which is a cry over exploitation. And here I would say that the Malbim is possibly, that Rav Shlomo is possibly I don't know if he's directly disagreeing, but Rav Shlomo, he makes the point and emphasizes that everything here is a legal process. While Malbim is explaining that the second sect is referring to exploitation that's going on. So what does he do? What does he do? In Pasuk Zayin, "Vayimalech libi alai va'ariva et hachorim v'et haskalim ve'omra lehem masa ish be'achiv atem noshim v'aten alehem kila gdola." Vayimalech libi alai. This is a very interesting expression, right? And there's different ways to explain it. We're going to go with Rashi's explanation here in Pasuk Zayin. He says, "V'yoetz libi b'atzmi," right? He consulted with himself. He thought about it. He thought it through. What should I do? V'ariva nitvakachti im achorim v'skanim she'em ashiri. He contended with the nobles and the prefects. These were the rich people. Okay, he comes and he confronts them. V'omra lehem, and I say to them, "Madua atem kach osim?" Why are you doing this? You should be sustaining the poor people. You should be worrying about the poor people that are here, right? ואתם מלווים להם ממון לכבוש בניהם ובנותיהם וסודותיהם וחרמיהם ובתיהם but instead, what are you doing? Right? You're demanding the loans that, yes, might belong to you, but you're demanding that instead of supporting them, you're lending them money so that they have to give up their sons and daughters, their fields and their vineyards and their houses in order to pay you back. And so what does he do? He gathers people in order to yell at the noblemen to embarrass them. Right? He causes a ruckus. He doesn't let this lavor al seder yom, as they say in Israel. Like, he doesn't let it just pass by. Right? He stops and he takes a stand, which is a difficult situation because he needs also the partnership with the nobleman as well for everything that he's doing for the building that he's doing, and he needs their support of the nobleman in order to be successful in his role here, in his leadership role. And yet, as Rav Tzvi Selensky points out, he has this inner battle, and that's what Vayimalech alai libi is. That on one hand, his intellectually he says, you know what, it's very risky to come and confront these noblemen, but his heart says to him, I can't let this go. I can't tolerate. It's unbearable. I can't tolerate to watch what's going on, that the poor people are suffering. at the hands of the nobleman. And he goes on to explain in Parakeh Pasuk Chet, and he says to them, "Anachnu kalilu at achenu haYehudim alimkarim legoyim kedevanu." And he goes on to explain that this isn't mentioned in the Psukim, but it seems to be that he was involved in also P'tiyei Shvuyim, that he redeemed people that were captive, right? We bought back our Jewish brothers who were sold to the nations, and now will you now sell your brothers so that they must be sold back to us? And what happens? Vayecharishu v'lo matzu davar. They kept silent and they didn't answer. So whether or not they didn't answer because they didn't want to listen, they didn't answer because they had nothing to say, they were apathetic, they were embarrassed, it's not clear. It just says vayecharishu. They were silent, v'lo matzu davar. And they didn't have anything to reply with. Um, if we scroll down here, the Malbim says that Anachnu Kalinu, when he's referring to he and his supporting group that's around him, those that are working with him, is Achim and La'arim, as he calls it. He says, "Hello, Anachnu Padinu B'Pidyon Shvuyim." Right? We redeemed people that were taken captive by captors, and we bought the Shvuyim liknot mi'adam et achenu nimkarim legoyim. Okay, we did as best as we could to buy them back from their captors. And so now, how is it possible that you're taking them now as well? And right? That they're also could be possibly selling them and using them as slaves, also to give over to the goyim, and then therefore, then we're going to have to redeem them, and they'll be resold to us. Hello, zot pri is this going to be the fruit of your labor? Is this really the type of people that you want to be? But until now, again, we still don't see a response. We just see silence. So he goes on after the silence. ואומר לא טוב הדבר אשר אתם עושים, הלא ביראת אלוקים תלכו מחרפת הגויים אויבינו. So it's interesting in Pasuk 10, he goes on, he continues. He doesn't leave it, they're silent, nothing happens. He goes on and he presses it. And he says, what you're doing isn't right. You should act biyirat Elokim. Rav Trapper comes to claim, and this is something that we see biblically. Usually when we think of yirat Elokim, we think of fear of heaven, right? The yirat shamayim. The way when we say Yirat Hashem, that you fear God, and so therefore you don't violate His commandments. But in Tanakh, biblically, you can see Rav Menachem Leibtek speaks about this, Lechava Leibowitz speaks about this, that Yirat Elokim is referring to morality. And one of the famous examples of it is with Abraham and Sarah, when they go and Avimelech takes Sarah because Abraham says that it's his sister, and so he takes her. He sees a beautiful woman, so he takes her as his own. And he asks Abraham later, "Why didn't you tell me?" And he says, "Because that there's not fear of God." What he's not. I don't think that Abraham Avinu was expecting them to be shomer mitzvot, to have fear of heaven. But Yirat Elokim is referring to also a morality that's going on. And it's also the Cherpat Goyim is that we also, as Rav Trapper explains, that we also have our purpose in life as well to be an Or Goyim, and when we're not acting in a just way, when we're not treating the poor in the way that we're meant to be treating them, then it also causes a big Chilul Hashem. And he goes further on and he says, "V'gam ali my brothers and my servants, we also have claims of money, and gain against them. Let us now abandon those claims." So what he's saying here is that he as well is going to leave the claim, that he's going to cancel out these claims as well. And that, I think, here is one of the secrets of what he's doing. As the Malbim explains, "V'gam lo tomru sheli mochich otchem miplei shelo yeh li hefsed mizeh she'ela li lo shemam." And he's saying, don't think that I'm coming here as an outsider to rebuke you, and I have no loss in this. Al zeh amar shegam ali v'achai v'larai lo shim bahem. He said, we also have claims on them. We also need to could ask for loans to be repaid to us. We're going to leave it. We're going to forgive them. We're going to pardon them for this debt that they have to us. And here we see that Nechemia is leading by example. And once he's leading by example, that's when things start to move. Okay, he's when he comes and he shows them that he's this dugma yeshit for them, then suddenly we start to see that he breaks through. He breaks through to the nation, and he goes on in pasuk yud aleph. Hashivu lahem kayom stotem karmem. He says, return to them, give them back their fields, their vineyards, their houses, their money. And in pasuk yud bet, they say they agree. ויאמרו להשיב ומהם לא לבקש. They said, we're going to give it back. We're going to give back everything that we have taken, everything that they have given to us in order to repay their loans. We're going to do exactly what you asked of us. It's amazing that what we see here is that Nechemia is through his personal, as Rav Shurlo explains, that he succeeds in bringing about this social revolution. And he himself also, in addition, as he explains later on, we see in the Psukim, he doesn't take taxes in order to finance himself. As he refers to his predecessors that used to do that, they would take money from the people in order to finance their luxurious lives. He doesn't do that. He makes sure that he is this perfect dugma ishit. He's a role model for the people. And what Rav Shlomo goes on to explain is that at the time of this national operation, right, of rebuilding the walls of Yerushalayim, the test of a leader is, does he see that Gdi HaMiskel, that pitiful, the weak lamb, right, that we know of from the lamb from the story of Moshe. And this is how David and Moshe, this is how they were tested for their specific shlichut, for their purpose, their aim, their shlichut, I say that in English, that are they able to, when they're in these big pastures, this expansive pastures, are they able to worry about that small gdi? And so for Nechemia, for here, he's like this traffic sign. He's this traffic sign for us. And he's coming and he's giving us this message. And he's saying, it cannot be that in a sha'at cherem, even in a time of emergency, when oftentimes, as he explained previously, that's where the inner deterioration begins, of the crumbling down of society often begins, that it can't be, right? That even if they're building the wall and they have these grandiose national aims, which are extremely important, it can't be that we won't be concerned for those people that have entered into this situation where they have these loans and they're chasing their tails and they don't have food and they don't know how to get through the day and and how to thrive and how to live. And so the message of Nehemiah is that he takes his position and he's once again able to stir the people to act, which is really this it's courageous and it's also inspiring. And he doesn't begin with sanctions, as later on we see that the sanctions come in, because if he had begun with force, it's likely that he would not have succeeded. But he doesn't begin with force. He begins with, first we see that he has his own inner um, his own anger, which is his passion, which is his care. Right? He's not apathetic to the situation. There's an outcry in the street, and he can't turn away. He can't ignore the cry. He's angry and he's fired up. He's triggered. And at first he tries, and the nation doesn't respond, and he keeps going and he keeps pushing until finally the nation moves, and they say okay. And he causes this social action, this social revolution to come about. After examining this Yerushalayim, the type of Yerushalayim that Nechemia is trying to build, we see that we see the walls that are coming up around us that he's building with the nation. We also see him confronting and bringing down the walls that are between us, which are the social rifts. Now, let us look into, just to conclude, to end off, let us look into the actual name of Yerushalayim in order to understand on an even deeper level the essence of this golden city. If you look in Breshit Rabbah, and this is inspired by the shir of Rav Yitzchak Levi, if you look in Breshit Rabbah, under Yerushalayim, A Tale of Two Laves, Aram kara oto yir'ah. Okay, so the Yerushalayim, Avram calls Yerushalayim Yir'eh. Okay, as it says in the pasuk, in the context of Akedat Yitzchak, Vayikra Avraham Shem HaMakom Ahu Hashem Yir'eh. He calls the name of the place Hashem Yir'eh. Okay, whatever that means. Hashem will see, will fear, or okay, let's leave that for now. Shem, the son of Noach, kara oto Shalem. He called Yerushalayim Shalem. Sheleamar, as we see in Perek Yudalit of Breshit, Malki Tzedek Melech Shalem. Malki Tzedek is also interestingly that the kings of Yerushalayim have the name Tzedek in their name. Adoli Tzedek, Malki Tzedek. The last king of Yerushalayim was Tzidkiyahu. Malki Tzedek Melech Shalem. The Chazal say that Malki Tzedek was Shem, the son of Noach. He calls it Shalem. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu im koreh ali oto yir'eh. If I call it Yir'eh, Shem, Adam Tzadik Mitraem, right? If I call it just Yir'eh, then Shem, who's this righteous man, he'll be angry. But if I just call it Shalem, Avram Adam Tzadik Mitraem, but then if I call it just Shalem, then Avram will be angry. Ela hareli koreh oto Yerushalayim. I'm going to call it Yerushalayim, which is a shiluv, this combination, integration of the two. Kamo shekaru shleihem Yir'eh Shalem Yerushalayim. Okay, the same way he takes these two instances, God takes these two instances, combines them, integrates the two names into the name that we know, Yerushalayim. So Rav Yitzchak Levi, he goes through, he brings in different midrashim, different sources. There are different interpretations of this name combination. And in his words, he explains that the two aspects of the city combine to create a single wholeness. Okay, so whether or not you see it as yir'ah or yir'eh, to see or to fear, or if you see the shalem from the word mushlam, from perfection, or shalom as peace, we're going to go with the opinion that he brings in, the interpretation of Rav Shaviv, which Rav Yitzchak brings in. And Rav Shaviv explains that that yir'ah and shalem is a combination of that awe and peace, of shalom. He explains that the relationship between Kohelet and Shir HaShirim is like the relationship between Yirah and Shalom, right? As Kohelet, Yirat Shamayim is what's emphasized, right? That's the whole point of it at the end of the Sefer. Yirah expresses, it indicates this distance, this awe that we have, a distance that we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that we stand at Har Sinai, Vayachared Kol Ha'am, we're shaking, we're trembling, we have this great awe of God, and we couldn't have a relationship without that. On the other hand, Shalom reflects closeness, a connectedness, right? And the combination of these two words is really the unification of two opposite things, of something that's distance and something that's connectedness. And so the unification, which is Yerushalayim, of these two opposite traits, right? And Rav Breuer, Rav Yitzchak brings in his article, he explains that the two episodes that Avram has reflect these two aspects beautifully, okay? So if you have Akedat Yitzchak, which is when Avram calls the place Hashem Yir'eh, and you have Malki Tzedek, which calls the place Shalom, with Akedat Yitzchak, the divine selection of Yerushalayim is expressed in the fact that it's an ideal place of worshiping God. Yerushalayim is the ideal place to worship God, because what happened there, like Akedat Yitzchak, was the antithesis of paganism. What was paganism? One of the main ways of worship was to sacrifice your son to the king of Molech. At that point of Akedat Yitzchak, God didn't want Abraham to sacrifice his son. He wanted Abraham to fulfill his command wholeheartedly, but not to go through with it, right? So here, Yerushalayim is that manifestation of this connection between God and man. Whereas the story of Malki Tzedek and Avraham allies himself with Malki Tzedek as opposed to the king of stone. And so here in this story, Yerushalayim is depicted as this as a city of justice, as a place of peace, which is the antithesis to what was going on in stone, which is interesting how both places not only show what they represent, but also show it's what they represent is made more clearer by showing the antithesis, the contrast to what they are not, right? So Yerushalayim is not like stone. Yerushalayim expresses the manifestation of our relationship between Ben Adam Lechavero, between man and himself, and his fellow man, right? And so, as he explains here, Rav Yitzchak Levi, in his article, The Significance, and I definitely recommend reading the whole article, the perfect reality that will allow the full revelation of the qualities of Jerusalem is composed of both elements. On the one hand, justice and righteousness, unity and peace, which will facilitate the establishment of earthly kingship in the capital city. On the other hand, awe and a proper relationship between man and God, which will facilitate the full revelation of God's presence resting in his temple. Only by virtue of this will the kingship over the city be successful. So here, he beautifully explains that integration of the two. And Rabbi Sachs as well on Parshat Re'eh, he has also a beautiful article. It's on his website. I recommend reading the full article. He brings in Judaism's vision for social justice, and he says, if you seek to understand Judaism's social vision, look at its anti-poverty legislation. And he brings in the psukim from Devarim. If there's a poor man among your brothers in any of the towns, and I'm not going to go through all of this. Rather, be open-handed and freely lend him sufficient for his needs and that which he lacks. Be careful not to harbor this wicked thought that in the year of Shemitah that will cancel, the debts will be canceled, so that therefore you won't want to help him because he won't repay you. And he explains here that there will give generously to him and do so without a grudging heart. That because of this, your God will bless you in all of your work, and there will always be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed towards your brothers and towards the poor and needy in your land. That's in Sefer Devarim. And Rabbi Sachs brings in, and I cut out that part and bring in the whole source, the 8 different levels of of helping out the poor. And through these 8 different levels, you see like what the lowest level to the highest level is of matalot aliyim. And what Rabbi Sachs says about this is this exquisitely collaborated ethic is shot through with psychological insight. What matters is not only how much you give, but also how you do so. Anonymity in the giving of aid is essential to dignity. The poor must not be embarrassed. The rich must not be allowed to feel superior. We give, not to take pride in our generosity, still less to emphasize the dependency of others, but because we belong to a covenant of human solidarity, and because that is what God wants us to do, honoring the trust through which He has temporarily lent us wealth in the first place, right? So in conclusion, as Rav Tzvi Selensky points out, the difference between Nechemia and the other prophets is that the other prophets are rebuking the nation, and they're these lonely men of faith. They're alone. Yirmiyahu was tortured. He suffered. He was on his own. But Nechemia, you see that he's surrounded by his achai v'le'arai, the people that surround him. He has support. He takes assertive action. He doesn't just rebuke and cry out, but he makes sure that something moves, that something changes. And Nehemiah, as we spoke about last week, he's a man that integrates, he combines, right? The story of the tool in one hand and the weapon in another, right? And as we brought in that imagery of the tekes hashpa'ah, the ceremony of a chayal being sworn into the army, of holding the weapon in one hand and the talach in the other, of the ruach and the guf, right? And just as well, that he's able to integrate these two aspects of Yerushalayim, of the Yir'ah and the Shalom. He builds a city. He has that Yirat Hashem. He has that relationship with God where he's constantly in prayer towards God throughout the Sefer. You can see it, how really it is God that in the end he always goes back to God and prays and thanks. But he's building the city of tzedek and of chibur, of connection. Justice connects, whereas social gaps, which are either caused by corruption, exploitation, or just, as Rav Schuller explains, just because that's how it happens in every society, social gaps alienate and justice collects. And this is Nechemia's Yerushalayim. While he's building a wall, one between us, the answer to that is while he's building the wall around us, he's taking down the wall between us. Yom Yerushalayim Sameach.